Estribillo cada mañana, mi cuerpo me recuerda una larga vida, una silenciosa protesta contra el paso del tiempo. Mis articulaciones crujen como las tablas desgastadas del suelo de esta casa que he ocupado durante 3 décadas. Cada amanecer es un duro recordatorio. Mis 68 años significan más que una simple cifra en mi pasaporte, representan un vasto lapso de tiempo, una carga que se siente más pesada con cada año que pasa, especialmente desde que Elaine se fue. Han pasado 5 años, pero a veces, por pura costumbre, todavía preparo café para 2. Overland Park nunca fue una ciudad ambiciosa, simplemente un típico suburbio de Kansas City, caracterizado por residencias impecables, jardines meticulosamente cuidados y un ritmo de vida tranquilo. Sin embargo, para Elaine y para mí, se convirtió en nuestro santuario. Ahora, cuando observo el lado este de mi propiedad, donde ella una vez cultivó un pequeño parterre, solo veo plantas invasoras. Nunca encontré la motivación para cuidarlo. Hoy es domingo, el día de la llegada prevista de Brice y Pali. Antes esperaba con ansias estas visitas. Ahora, cada aparición me quita la vitalidad que me queda. Brice, mi único hijo, heredó mi tenacidad y mi mandíbula firme, pero carecía de mi dedicación al trabajo y mi sentido del deber. A sus 39 años, todavía cree que la vida le debe algo extraordinario. Recuerdo cómo, de niño, se imaginaba arquitecto, pero en lugar de estudiar, prefería ganar dinero sin esfuerzo y una libertad sin límites. Por ello, ha pasado la última década trabajando como camionero en una empresa de logística. No hay ningún defecto inherente en esta profesión, pero para él no era una verdadera vocación, era simplemente una forma de eludir el esfuerzo genuino. Su esposa, Pali, no es mejor. Una florista que finge tener un gusto refinado. Se conocieron hace 8 años cuando Brice entregó un envío de flores en su lugar de trabajo. Pali es 5 años menor que él, pero a veces, su astucia la hace parecer mayor que todos nosotros. En su relación, ella es la inteligencia y él, la fuerza. El timbre me sacudió los pensamientos. Abrí la puerta y los encontré en el umbral. Brice llevaba su habitual chaqueta vaquera, ahora claramente demasiado ajustada, y Pali lucía un bolso nuevo de diseñador, sin duda fuera de su alcance económico. «Hola, papá», murmuró Brice con torpeza, abrazándome, con olor a cigarrillos y colonia barata. «Hola, Eugene», dijo Pali, ofreciéndome un beso al aire cerca de la mejilla. «¿Cómo te encuentras?» «Bueno», respondí, invitándolos a pasar. «¿Te apetece un café?» «Por supuesto», sonrió Pali, recorriendo la habitación con la mirada como si evaluara el valor de cada objeto de mi sala. Mientras estaba ocupada en la cocina, oí sus voces en voz baja, hablando de algo. Se quedaron en silencio cuando volví con la bandeja. «Tenía intención de preguntarte, papá», empezó Brice, tomando una taza. «¿Sigues guardando tus fondos en esos? ¿Cómo se llaman? ¿Bonos? El mercado está muy impredecible últimamente». Di un sorbo a mi café, observándolo por encima del borde de la taza. Era la tercera vez que mencionaba mis ahorros este mes. «Guardo una parte ahí, otra en otro sitio», respondí vagamente. «Quizás deberías convertirlo todo en efectivo», sugirió Pali, con un brillo momentáneo en los ojos. «O en oro. Mucha gente lo hace ahora». «Soy demasiado mayor para cambiar mis rutinas», bromeé, pero en mi interior, una creciente inquietud se apoderó de mí. Brice cambió rápidamente de tema. «¿Sigues jugando a los bolos los martes y jueves?» «Sí, con Ted y Roy», afirmé. «El único pasatiempo de un anciano». «¿Y a qué hora sueles volver?», preguntó Pali con indiferencia. «Sobre las 9, a veces a las 10». Intercambiaron miradas, y en esa breve mirada, percibí algo que me estremeció. Elaine siempre decía que desconfiaba demasiado. Quizás solo me lo imaginaba. Al fin y al cabo, ¿por qué los hijos no deberían interesarse en la vida de su padre? Sin embargo, algo me inquietaba. Una cierta intuición, perfeccionada durante años como tasadora de seguros, donde aprendí a detectar a los estafadores con el más mínimo indicio. Después del café, Brice se ofreció a ayudar con el grifo que goteaba del baño. Una muestra de iniciativa poco habitual en él. Mientras trasteábamos con las herramientas, Pali anunció su intención de airear la casa y abrió las ventanas de varias habitaciones. No le di mucha importancia hasta que la vi quedarse en mi habitación más tiempo del necesario. Cuando se marcharon, prometiendo volver la semana siguiente antes de sus vacaciones, no pude evitar la sensación de que algo no iba bien. Cerré la puerta tras ellos y procedí a inspeccionar mi habitación. Todo parecía intacto, pero la disposición de los objetos en la cómoda se había movido ligeramente, casi imperceptiblemente. Sin embargo, para alguien que ordena sus llaves y su cartera con precisión, esos pequeños cambios son evidentes. Abrí el cajón superior, donde guardaba los papeles importantes. Todo estaba en su sitio, pero parecía como si alguien los hubiera estado revisando. Curioso. Esa noche, sonó el teléfono. Era Brice. Papá, escucha. Tenemos dificultades económicas. Su voz sonaba tensa. ¿Podrías prestarnos unos miles? Te lo devolveremos después de las vacaciones. Te lo prometo. Así que esa era la razón. Últimamente, estas peticiones se habían vuelto frecuentes. Primero, un préstamo hasta el día de cobro. Luego, una inversión en el prometedor negocio de un amigo. Luego, los problemas de salud de Pali. El dinero nunca me lo devolvieron. Brice, ya hablamos de esto la última vez. Intenté mantener la compostura. No puedo seguir rescatándote. Mi pensión no es considerable. Eso era mentira. Después de 35 años en una aseguradora, había acumulado una suma considerable. Vivía frugalmente, sobre todo por costumbre. Pero Brice no tenía por qué enterarse. Vamos, papá. Su voz adoptó un tono suplicante. Sé que tienes algo ahorrado. Siempre has sido cuidadoso con el dinero. Cuida tu tono, lo reprendí. No estoy obligado a mantener a mi hijo adulto y a su esposa. Un silencio denso llenó la línea. Lo siento, dijo Brice finalmente. Es solo que dependíamos de ello. Queríamos que estas vacaciones fueran especiales. ¿Qué vacaciones? Pregunté, aunque ya lo sabía. México, se animó Brice. Pali lleva siglos soñando con ello. Solo es una semana, pero los billetes ya están comprados. ¿Con qué fondo si estás en la ruina? Bueno, hemos ido ahorrando poco a poco, balbuceó. Oye, papá, ¿podrías al menos darme algo de dinero para gastar? Ya sabes cuánto le gusta a Pali ir de compras. Suspiré. De acuerdo, ven mañana y lo arreglamos. Después de colgar, me quedé en la oscuridad un buen rato. Algo me impulsaba a revisar mis fondos ocultos. Desde la primera gran crisis financiera, no había confiado del todo en los bancos. Siempre guardaba algo de dinero en casa, en un lugar secreto que nadie conocía, o mejor dicho, que nadie conocía hasta hace poco. El año pasado, cuando Brice me ayudaba con las reparaciones tras la inundación, le pedí descuidadamente que sacara herramientas del armario del sótano, olvidando que había dejado abierto el panel que ocultaba la caja fuerte. Logré cerrarla cuando se acercó, pero su expresión indicaba que se había dado cuenta. Había reubicado el material desde entonces, pero la aprensión persistía. Al día siguiente, al llegar, les di $300. Todos los que me sobran, dije. Pali no pudo disimular su decepción, pero Brice se mostró efusivo en su gratitud. Antes de irse, me preguntaron con indiferencia si tenía pensado visitar a mi hermana en Des Moines la semana que viene, como solía hacer en verano. No, este año me quedo en casa, respondí, observando atentamente sus reacciones. Sus expresiones delataban una decepción mal disimulada. Qué lástima, dijo Pali. Te vendría bien un descanso. Se fueron, y empecé a comprender que algo estaba sucediendo. Su creciente interés en mi agenda, sus preguntas sobre finanzas, las peculiares acciones de Pali en mi habitación. Todo se consolidó en una imagen inquietante. Decidí hacer un experimento. Unos días antes de sus vacaciones, le comenté casualmente por teléfono a Brice que iría de pesca con unos amigos el día de su partida y que volvería tarde. La reacción fue inmediata. Oh, excelente, papá. Ya era hora de que te tomaras un descanso. Habríamos pasado a despedirnos, pero como no estarás aquí. Detecté un alivio apenas disimulado en su voz. Por la noche, revisé mi compartimento oculto tras la pared falsa del trastero. Todo seguía intacto, sobres con facturas por un total de aproximadamente $40,000. Los toqué con una especie de ansiosa reverencia. Ese dinero representaba décadas de ahorro y un empleo complementario. Un seguro para un día lluvioso, como solía decir Elaine. Me dormí con el corazón encogido. En mi sueño, tenía 25 años otra vez, y Elaine y yo acabábamos de comprar esta casa. Brice, un niño pequeño, corría por las habitaciones, riendo. Todo era sencillo y claro. Desperté con una sensación de tristeza que me acompañó todo el día. 2 días antes de su partida, encontré en mi buzón un itinerario impreso de la agencia de viajes. Debió de haberse deslizado del bolsillo de Brice durante su última visita. El total de un viaje a un resort de 4 estrellas en la costa de la Riviera Maya era de $6,000. Dadas sus circunstancias económicas, que yo conocía bien, tales gastos eran imposibles. Algo no cuadraba y empecé a sospechar lo peor. El día de su partida, no fui a pescar. En cambio, conduje hasta el aeropuerto, decidido a confirmar mi inquietante teoría. De camino, paré en mi casa para revisar el escondite. El corazón me dio un vuelco. El dinero había desaparecido. Los $40,000. Los sobres vacíos estaban cuidadosamente doblados, como burlándose de mi ingenuidad. El mundo se oscureció momentáneamente a mi alrededor, y me zumbaban los oídos. ¿Cómo podían? Mi propio hijo. Mi primer instinto fue contactar a las autoridades, pero algo me lo impidió. ¿Vergüenza? ¿Preocupación por Brice a pesar de sus acciones? ¿O el deseo de resolverlo yo mismo? De camino al aeropuerto, intenté ordenar mis pensamientos. ¿Qué diría al verlos? ¿Montaría una escena? ¿Exigiría que me devolvieran el dinero? Y entonces lo comprendí. No anticiparon mi presencia. El factor sorpresa podría revelar más que cualquier explicación. Y entonces, solo entonces, decidiría mi siguiente paso. El martes por la mañana me trajo dolor de cabeza y una sensación de infortunio inminente. No siempre fui tan supersticiosa, pero años de experiencia me habían enseñado a confiar en mi instinto. Y justo ahora, gritaba peligro. Me levanté de la cama, me lavé rápidamente y fui a la cocina. La cafetera que Elaine me había regalado para nuestro último aniversario me saludó con su zumbido familiar. Echando un vistazo al calendario, noté que Brice y Pali se iban en solo 3 días. Algo indicaba que su extraño comportamiento de las últimas semanas estaba relacionado con este viaje. Tras la llamada de ayer con mi hijo, decidí revisar mis fondos ocultos. Mi desconfianza hacia los bancos empezó en mi juventud. Empecé como tasadora de seguros en los años 70, cuando la economía estaba en crisis. Vi a demasiada gente perderlo todo por una confianza excesiva en las instituciones financieras. Desde entonces, siempre había guardado parte de mi dinero en casa, en lugares seguros y ocultos, que cambiaba cada pocos años. Al entrar en la sala, moví la estantería, un pesado mueble de roble con ruedas. Detrás había una pequeña caja fuerte de pared. Normalmente no guardaba nada de valor allí, era una vieja táctica de distracción. La caja fuerte contenía algunos papeles, una pequeña cantidad de efectivo y el anillo de mi madre, que quería para la hija de Brice, si alguna vez lo tenía. Tras inspeccionar la caja fuerte, confirmé que todo estaba en su lugar. El verdadero escondite estaba en el sótano, detrás de un panel falso en la pared, cerca del calentador de agua. Bajé las escaleras crujientes y encendí una bombilla tenue. El sótano olía a humedad y a objetos viejos, un aroma que siempre asociaba con el pasado. Allí se guardaban cajas de fotografías, los juguetes de la infancia de Brice, herramientas y utensilios de jardinería. Aparté la caja de herramientas y me acerqué a la pared. El panel parecía ser una parte normal del revestimiento, pero si uno sabía dónde aplicar presión. Presioné en un punto específico y el panel se deslizó ligeramente hacia un lado. Detrás había un pequeño contenedor metálico, no una caja fuerte en el sentido estricto de la palabra, pero un escondite fiable si su ubicación permanecía desconocida. El corazón me latía con fuerza al abrirlo. Dentro debería haber fajos de billetes de $100 cuidadosamente apilados, que sumaban aproximadamente $40,000. Mis ahorros acumulados durante años de trabajo diligente, mi red de seguridad financiera. El contenedor estaba vacío. No procesé de inmediato lo que veía. El vacío me devolvía la mirada como una tumba abierta. Al principio, pensé que había elegido el lugar equivocado, aunque era imposible. Entonces pensé que quizá yo mismo había escondido el dinero y lo había olvidado. La demencia senil era una preocupación real. Pero recordaba con claridad haber revisado este escondite apenas una semana antes, tras la visita de Brice y Pali. Una oleada de furia fría me invadió. No había necesidad de especular sobre quién se había llevado el dinero. Mi hijo, mi único hijo, a quien crié solo tras la muerte de Elaine, a quien me esforcé por darle todo lo que estaba en mi mano. Brice no solo me había robado el dinero. Me había robado la confianza en él, en la familia, en cualquier atisbo de justicia en este mundo. Subí las escaleras, apoyándome pesadamente en la barandilla, y me hundí en mi vieja silla. Imágenes desfilaron ante mis ojos, el joven Brice en su triciclo, el adolescente Brice con su expresión perpetuamente descontenta, Brice el día de su boda con Pali, tan alegre y lleno de promesas. Y el Brice de hoy, ladrón, embustero, traicionando a su propio padre. No sé cuánto tiempo estuve allí sentado, con la mirada perdida. El reloj del salón dio las 10 cuando finalmente me obligué a levantarme y actuar. El primer paso era conseguir pruebas. Cogí mi teléfono y llamé a Brice, pero no contestó. Intenté con Pali. El mismo resultado. Era inusual, normalmente siempre respondían, sobre todo a mis llamadas. Quizás temían que ya hubiera descubierto el robo. Optando por un enfoque más asertivo, conduje hasta su casa, un modesto bungalow en el este de Overland Park, que habían alquilado durante los últimos 3 años. Al llegar, vi su coche en la entrada, lo que indicaba que estaban en casa. Llamé a la puerta. No hubo respuesta. Llamé más fuerte. Silencio. Dando la vuelta a la casa, me asomé por la ventana del salón. La habitación parecía inusualmente vacía. Faltaban algunos objetos decorativos y fotografías que normalmente se exhiben en estanterías. Una gran bolsa de deporte, medio llena de pertenencias, yacía en el sofá. No solo estaban empacando para unas vacaciones. Se preparaban para huir. El viaje a México era solo una cortina de humo. Con mi dinero, pretendían empezar una nueva vida en algún lugar lejano. Regresé a mi coche y me senté, reflexionando sobre la situación. Podría contactar a la policía de inmediato, pero ¿qué diría? ¿Que mi hijo robó dinero sin declarar que guardaba en casa, que carecía de pruebas que justificaran mis sospechas, que yo mismo les había proporcionado una llave? No, la policía no sería de ayuda en ese caso, al menos no de inmediato. Al llegar a casa, decidí registrarla a fondo en busca de pistas. Empecé por los cubos de basura, una vieja costumbre de mi época como investigador de seguros. A menudo, la gente tira las pruebas más cruciales a la basura. En el baño, descubrí un itinerario arrugado de Sunisí de Travel, el mismo que había visto antes. Lo alicé y examiné los detalles. Paquete completo, sueño mexicano, 7 días, 6 noches. Hotel del Mare Resort, Playa del Carmen, México. Fecha de salida, 15 de junio. El costo total fue de 6,300 pesos para 2 personas, incluyendo vuelos, alojamiento y comidas con todo incluido. ¿De dónde sacaron semejante suma? Brice no ganaba más de 4,000 pesos al mes. Pali, aún menos. Dadas sus constantes quejas por la falta de fondos para el alquiler, semejante gasto parecía fantástico. A menos que... Recordé que un mes antes, Pali me había mostrado fotos de un resort en su teléfono. Brice y yo soñamos con visitarlo algún día, había dicho entonces. Algún día, había llegado demasiado pronto y, claramente, a mi costa. Siguiendo mi búsqueda, encontré un catálogo de joyería en el dormitorio, en un cajón de la mesita de noche, con páginas marcadas que destacaban artículos caros. Alguien había garabateado en los márgenes, después de las vacaciones. La letra era de Pali. La sensación de traición se intensificó. No solo habían aceptado dinero para un viaje. Planeaban gastar mis ahorros en la vida de lujo con la que siempre habían fantaseado, pero por la que nunca habían querido trabajar. Encendí mi computadora, decidida a confirmar otra corazonada. Ingresé los datos de Brice y Pali en la página web de la aerolínea. El sistema mostraba los boletos reservados, de Kansas City a Cancún, 15 de junio, vuelo de regreso, 22 de junio. Todo coincidía con su historia de unas vacaciones de una semana, pero algo me decía que no usarían sus boletos de regreso. Más tarde esa noche, decidí llamarlos de nuevo. Esta vez, Brice contestó, pero su voz sonaba tensa. Hola, papá. Disculpas, he estado ocupado todo el día preparando las vacaciones. Entiendo, dije, intentando mantener un tono normal. Quería preguntarte si podrías pasar mañana. Quiero darte algo antes de que salgas. Hubo una pausa. Casi podía sentir físicamente a Brice buscando excusas. No estoy seguro, papá. Tenemos mucho que hacer. Solo 15 minutos, insistí. Encontré unos álbumes de fotos viejos y quería enseñarte algo. Tu madre me pidió que te diera algo cuando llegara el momento. Creo que ahora es el momento. Mencionar a Elaine siempre convencía a Brice. Incluso ahora, después de todo lo que había hecho, no dudaba en usarlo. De acuerdo, aceptó a regañadientes. Pasaremos mañana sobre las 6 de la tarde, pero no por mucho tiempo. De acuerdo. Por supuesto, respondí. Estaré esperando. Después de colgar, sentí una extraña sensación de calma. Una estrategia empezó a formarse en mi mente. Brice y Pali no sabían que había descubierto el dinero desaparecido. Creían que todo iba según su plan. Eso me daba ventaja. Al día siguiente, contacté con mi viejo amigo, Edward Nall. Nos conocimos en la universidad, luego seguimos caminos separados, pero mantuvimos el contacto. Edward se había forjado una carrera en aduanas, ascendiendo a jefe de departamento, y ahora, aunque jubilado, aún poseía contactos e influencia en sus círculos. Eddie, soy Eugene, dije cuando respondió. Necesito hablar seriamente contigo. Eugene, hace siglos que no sé nada de ti. ¿Pasó algo? Su voz sonaba genuinamente preocupada. ¿Se podría decir eso? ¿Recuerdas que dijiste que me debías por esa situación con tu hijo? Años atrás, ayudé a su hijo a salir de un aprieto con el seguro. Sin mi intervención, el joven habría enfrentado la cárcel. Claro que lo recuerdo. ¿Qué necesitas? Le expliqué la esencia del asunto, omitiendo los detalles personales. Le dije que mi hijo y su esposa transportaban una cantidad considerable de dinero sin declarar a México. Le pedí que se encargara de que los recibieran en el lado mexicano. ¿Cuánto llevan? Preguntó Edward con vehemencia. Unos $40,000. Edward silbó. Es una suma considerable. ¿Estás seguro de que quieres seguir con esto? Estamos hablando de tu hijo. Claro que sí, respondí con firmeza. Necesitan una lección. De acuerdo, dijo Edward tras un momento de vacilación. Contactaré con un par de socios en Cancún. Se encargarán de tus familiares como corresponde, pero ten en cuenta que esto implicará un arresto oficial con consecuencias. Entiendo. Gracias. Después de la conversación, sentí una peculiar sensación de alivio. La situación había empezado a cambiar. La venganza es un plato que se sirve frío, dicen en las películas antiguas. Bueno, mi plato ya se había enfriado lo suficiente. Brice y Pali llegaron esa noche. Él estaba ansioso. Ella, excesivamente cordial. Les ofrecí té. Sentados en la cocina, los observé discretamente. Anoté detalles, el nuevo y caro reloj de pulsera en la muñeca de Brice, que antes no estaba allí, la blusa de diseño de Pali, sus constantes miradas furtivas cuando creían que no los veía. ¿Ya terminaste de hacer las maletas? Pregunté con indiferencia. Sí, casi todo está listo, respondió Pali. El vuelo es pasado mañana, temprano por la mañana. Maravilloso. México es un destino precioso. Lo visité una vez con tu madre, le dije a Brice. ¿Qué hotel elegiste? Del Mare Resort, dijo Pali con orgullo. Está justo en la costa. No es un capricho barato, comenté. ¿Cómo ahorraste para ello? Volvieron a intercambiar miradas. Llevamos mucho tiempo ahorrando, respondió Brice rápidamente. Y recibí una bonificación en el trabajo. Una falsedad. Otra falsedad. Ya veo, asentí. Bueno, me alegro por ti. Espero que tengas unas vacaciones inolvidables. ¿Mencionaste haber encontrado algo de mi madre? Preguntó Brice con impaciencia, claramente con ganas de cambiar de tema. Me levanté y saqué una pequeña caja del armario. Dentro había un antiguo anillo de plata con una pequeña amatista, la única joya que Elaine había heredado de su madre. Ella quería que fuera para tu hija cuando llegara el momento, dije, entregándole la caja a Brice. Lo aceptó con cierta decepción, esperando claramente algo más valioso. Pali apenas miró el anillo, su interés era tan fingido que me inquietó. Gracias, papá, murmuró Brice. Es muy conmovedor. Lo comprendí a la perfección. Nunca supo mentir de forma convincente. Sus ojos siempre lo delataban, igual que ahora. Partieron media hora después, citando numerosas tareas que completar antes del viaje. Me quedé en el porche, despidiéndolos con la mano, haciendo el papel de padre desprevenido. En cuanto su coche desapareció tras la curva, la sonrisa se me borró del rostro. De vuelta en casa, marqué el número de Edward para confirmar los detalles. Acordamos que él les daría la información a sus colegas mexicanos, el vuelo, una descripción general de Brice y Pali, y la presunta ubicación del dinero. Se llevarán una desagradable sorpresa en la aduana, me aseguró Edward. Los mexicanos se toman muy en serio el dinero sin declarar, sobre todo en cantidades tan grandes. ¿Qué les pasará? Detención, confiscación de dinero, posible deportación, en el peor de los casos, una condena a prisión en México. Sentí un remordimiento. ¿De verdad estaba preparada para enviar a mi propio hijo a una prisión mexicana? Pero entonces recordé mi escondite vacío, los años de esfuerzo desperdiciados por su avaricia, como habían planeado su traición, sentados a mi mesa, bebiendo mi té y sonriéndome. Que así sea, dije con firmeza. Se lo merecen. Después de colgar, me senté en un sillón y contemplé un buen rato la fotografía de Elaine sobre la repisa de la chimenea. ¿Qué diría ahora? ¿Aprobaría mis acciones o pediría perdón? No sabía la respuesta. Elaine siempre había sido más gentil que yo, más amable. Tal vez habría encontrado compasión en su corazón, incluso ante semejante traición. Pero Elaine ya no estaba, y yo era demasiado mayor para pasar por alto tales actos. Mañana iría al aeropuerto. Deseaba presenciar sus expresiones cuando se dieran cuenta de mi presencia. Ese sería solo el principio de su calvario. No sabía si alguna vez podría perdonar a Brice, pero de una cosa estaba segura, jamás olvidaría la lección que estaba a punto de impartirle. La mañana era húmeda, a pesar de ser mediados de junio. Nubes bajas se aferraban a las copas de los árboles y una lluvia ligera tamborileaba sobre el techo de mi viejo Ford. Me desperté mucho antes del amanecer, aunque normalmente me permitía quedarme en la cama un poco más. No podía dormir. Demasiados pensamientos me daban vueltas, pensamientos de traición, de dinero, de mi hijo, que había decidido simplemente quedarse con mis ahorros. Mientras tomaba un café solo bien cargado, busqué información sobre el vuelo de Brice y Pali. Salida a las 7 de la mañana del aeropuerto internacional de Kansas City. Eso significaba que debían llegar no más tarde de las 5. Planeaba llegar antes que ellos. Anoche, llamé de nuevo a Edward Nall y confirmé nuestro acuerdo. Sus socios mexicanos estarían esperando el vuelo desde Kansas City y realizarían una inspección especialmente minuciosa de la pareja sospechosa con las maletas llenas de dinero. Edward me aseguró que todo transcurriría sin incidentes. La aduana mexicana es famosa por su rigor con las cantidades no declaradas. A las 4 de la mañana, ya iba camino del aeropuerto. Las carreteras estaban desiertas, salvo algún que otro camión de larga distancia y taxi que transportaba pasajeros madrugadores. Mi Ford recorría los kilómetros con seguridad, y me preguntaba si estaba tomando la decisión correcta. Quizás debería haber contactado a la policía y denunciado el robo. ¿Pero qué pruebas tenía? Era mi palabra contra la de Brice. Además, el dinero estaba guardado en un lugar oculto que nunca había declarado oficialmente. No, la policía no era una opción. Tenía que gestionarlo yo mismo. Aparqué en el estacionamiento de larga estancia del aeropuerto a las 4:30 de la mañana y me dirigí a la terminal de salidas. Había poca gente dentro, algunos viajeros somnolientos con equipaje, personal del aeropuerto corriendo a sus puestos, un par de taxistas esperando clientes. Encontré una cómoda cafetería con vistas a la zona de facturación y pedí otro café. Desde allí, tenía una vista excelente de los mostradores donde se esperaba que aparecieran Brice y Pali. El tiempo transcurría lentamente. Observé cómo el aeropuerto se iba despertando poco a poco. Llegaban nuevos pasajeros, abrían tiendas y cafeterías, y el murmullo de voces se hacía más fuerte. A las 5:20 de la mañana, los vi. Brice arrastraba una maleta grande con ruedas, y Pali lo seguía con una bolsa de viaje al hombro y una maleta pequeña en la mano. Parecían tensos, sobre todo Brice. Su mirada se movía inquieta, como si anticipara una broma. Decidí esperar a que facturaran. Quería ver cómo manejaban su equipaje. ¿Estaba mi dinero dentro o habían optado por llevarlo en el equipaje de mano? Sin embargo, $40,000 en efectivo ocupan un volumen considerable, incluso en billetes de alta denominación. Se acercaron al mostrador y colocaron sus maletas en la báscula. A juzgar por la báscula, la maleta grande pesaba casi 30 kilogramos. No era de extrañar que el dinero estuviera escondido. Tras recibir sus tarjetas de embarque, Brice y Pali se dirigieron al control de seguridad. Era hora de actuar. Me levanté de la mesa y caminé hacia ellos, intentando parecer indiferente. Al verme, Brice se quedó paralizado. Su rostro palideció como si hubiera visto un fantasma. Pali, que caminaba ligeramente detrás de él, chocó con él y murmuró algo irritada. Pero al comprender el motivo de su pausa, también se quedó paralizada. Papá, la voz de Brice tembló, ¿qué haces aquí tan temprano? Sonreí con mi sonrisa más cordial. Decidí despedirlos, niños. No todos los días mi hijo vuela a México. Pali fue la primera en recomponerse. Eugene, qué considerado de tu parte. Su voz sonaba casi normal. Pero observé lo blancos que estaban sus nudillos mientras agarraba el asa de su maleta. Pero no deberías haberte levantado tan temprano por nosotros. No se preocupen, le quité importancia con un gesto. A mi edad, uno no duerme mucho, así que decidí combinar la necesidad con el placer. Despedirlos y ver el amanecer durante el viaje. Brice seguía con cara de estar enfermo. Me acerqué y le di una palmadita en el hombro. ¿Estás bien, hijo? Estás pálido. Estoy bien, dijo con dificultad. Solo estoy ansioso por el vuelo. Sabes, no me gusta mucho volar. Era cierto. Brice le tenía miedo a volar desde niño. Pero ahora, su aprensión claramente no se debía a eso. Entiendo. ¿Viajas lejos con todo ese equipaje? Señalé sus maletas. Parece que te vas a ir un mes, no una semana. Nosotros. Empezó Brice, pero Pali lo interrumpió. Ya sabes, mujeres, Eugene, necesito estar preparado para cualquier cosa, desde una fiesta en la piscina hasta una cena formal. Sonrió tensamente. Noté que su mirada se posó en la maleta grande que ya habían facturado, así que el dinero estaba allí. Claro, claro, asentí. Elaine siempre se llevaba la mitad de su armario, incluso los fines de semana. Hablando de cosas, Brice, ¿te acordaste del anillo de la abuela? Ayer estabas tan emocionado que quizá me dejaste la caja. No, no, me la llevé, respondió apresuradamente. Está en el bolso de Pali. Todo bien. Nos quedamos allí parados en un silencio incómodo. Podía ver cuánto deseaban deshacerse de mí, ir a la puerta de embarque, irse volando con mi dinero, pero seguí sonriendo y charlando trivialmente. ¿Qué planes tienen para las vacaciones? ¿Se relajarán en la playa o están organizando alguna excursión? Un poco de ambas cosas, respondió Pali, arreglándose el pelo nerviosamente. Sobre todo la playa y la piscina, claro, pero queremos visitar las ruinas de Tulum. Excelente elección, asentí. Tu madre y yo hemos estado allí, Brice. Es un lugar impresionante, sobre todo al atardecer. Anunciaron su vuelo. Brice se estremeció al oír el número. Tenemos que irnos, papá, dijo, visiblemente aliviado. Gracias por venir a despedirnos. Claro, hijo. ¿Cómo podría perderme un momento así? Lo abracé, notando la inusual rigidez de su cuerpo. Luego le di un ligero abrazo a Pali, y ella apenas logró evitar soltarse. Que tengas un buen vuelo. Disfruta de tus vacaciones y llámame cuando llegues para saber que estás a salvo. Lo haremos, prometió Pali, guiando a Brice hacia el control de seguridad. Me quedé de pie y los vi partir. Brice se giró una vez. Su mirada revelaba aprensión, y según me pareció, algo parecido al remordimiento. Pero rápidamente se dio la vuelta y aceleró el paso. Cuando desaparecieron de mi vista, volví a la cafetería y pedí el desayuno. No tenía apetito, pero necesitaba algo para entretenerme. Los imaginé pasando por el control de seguridad, nerviosos ante cada mirada de los oficiales, subiendo al avión, intentando aparentar ser turistas comunes, tranquilizándose al despegar, creyendo que lo peor ya había pasado. Ignoraban las verdaderas dificultades que les aguardaban en suelo mexicano. Después del desayuno, esperé el anuncio de su vuelo. El avión despegó puntualmente, llevando a mi hijo y a su esposa, junto con mi dinero, rumbo a los problemas. Al salir del aeropuerto, entré en mi coche y marqué el número de Edward. Ya están en el aire, dije cuando contestó. Vuelo KS 442, con llegada a Cancún a las 11:50 hora local. Entendido, respondió Edward con firmeza. ¿Seguro que quieres continuar con esto? Dudé un momento. Me imaginé al joven Brice, quien una vez me miró con admiración y confió en mí ciegamente. Pero entonces esa imagen fue reemplazada por la figura asustada y culpable de hoy, dispuesta a robarle a su propio padre. Sí, respondí con firmeza.
They need to understand that actions have consequences.
As you wish, Edward Said.
I've already contacted Ramon Garcia, my former colleague in Cancun. He will personally oversee the situation. Passengers on flight KS-442 will be subject to a thorough search. They're carrying the money in a large suitcase, I added. A gray Samsonite with a red tag. Excellent. That will simplify the task. Well, we'll keep you informed. As soon as they are detained, I'll call you immediately. Thanks, Eddie. I owe you. Come on, we're even. Besides, I don't care for thieves either, even if they are someone's children. We said goodbye, and I headed home.
A strange sensation filled me, a blend of bitterness and satisfaction.
Bitterness that my own son had betrayed me. Satisfaction that the betrayal would not go unpunished. At home, the first thing I did was inspect my empty hiding place. The void still gaped there, a stark reminder of what had occurred. Then I went into the living room and retrieved the photo album, the one I had mentioned to Bryce. It truly contained old photographs, Elaine with young Bryce in her arms, family trips to the lake, school holidays. Happy moments from a past that now seemed so distant. I wondered when precisely Bryce decided he could simply take my money. At what juncture did he cross that line where respect for his parents and fundamental decency became meaningless? Perhaps I made an error somewhere in raising him. Did I indulge him too much after his mother's death? Or, conversely, was I too strict? I tormented myself with these questions, sitting in my chair and mechanically turning the album's pages.
Outside the window, the rain intensified, drumming on the glass like impatient fingers.
Around noon, the telephone rang. I seized the receiver, expecting to hear Edward's voice with news, but it was merely a telemarketer offering a new insurance policy. I abruptly ended the conversation and returned to my chair. Time dragged on excruciatingly slowly. According to my calculations, Bryce and Polly's plane should have already landed in Cancun. Right now, they would be passing through passport control. Then they would proceed to baggage claim and customs inspection. That's where Edward's colleagues were supposed to meet them. I envisioned the scene in vivid detail, how they would stand by the baggage carousel, waiting for their gray suitcase with a red tag, how tensely Bryce would watch the suitcase when it appeared on the conveyor belt, how they would walk through the green nothing to declare corridor and then be stopped by customs officers. A polite request to undergo inspection. The suitcases opened. The cash discovered. The phone rang again, interrupting my thoughts. This time it was Edward. Eugene. His voice sounded businesslike. The operation was successful. Ramon just reported that your relatives were detained while attempting to import undeclared currency. $38,600 was found in the suitcase. I took a deep breath. Almost all of my money, but not all of it. Apparently, they had already spent some on tickets and other preparations. What now? I asked.
Standard procedure.
The money has been confiscated. They face a heavy fine, possibly deportation. In the worst case, a short stay in a local prison, but it usually doesn't come to that for tourists. Most likely, they will be held in custody for a few days while the case is being investigated and then deported. Will they discover that I reported them? Officially, no. Ramon will conduct everything as a routine check based on suspicious passenger behavior, but you know, people aren't foolish. They might figure it out. I nodded, even though Edward couldn't see it. Thanks, Eddie. Keep me informed. Okay. Certainly. And prepare yourself. They'll be back soon, and it won't be an easy conversation. After that call, I felt a strange emptiness. It was done.
Der Utrebiuschen Wes in motion.
Bryce and Polly must be panicking right now, sitting in some stuffy Mexican customs office, attempting to explain the origin of the money. Perhaps they were already remembering me, my unexpected encounter with them at the airport, beginning to understand that I knew everything from the start.
Did he feel satisfaction? Strangely enough, no.
More like weariness and a dull ache somewhere deep inside. Bryce is my only son, the only family I have left. But he betrayed me. And betrayal cannot be forgiven. Otherwise, it will recur. At one point, I found myself waiting for a call from Bryce. Surely the Mexican authorities would permit him one phone call. Who would he contact? Me, his father whom he had just robbed, or some friend who was unlikely to be able to assist in such a situation? The phone remained silent for the remainder of the day. I tried to distract myself. I watched television, attempted to read, even started tidying the garage, a long-postponed project, but my thoughts continually returned to Bryce and Polly, to their shocked faces when the customs officers opened the suitcase containing the money. In the evening, I prepared a simple dinner and ate it without tasting it. Then I sat on the back porch for a long time, watching the sun set. The rain finally ceased, and through the breaks in the clouds, I could see the clear sky painted in the orange and pink tones of twilight. Elaine loved sunsets. We often sat like this, arm in arm, watching the day yield to night. No two sunsets are alike, she would say. And she would add, just as no 2 days are alike. Each one is an opportunity to begin anew. I thought about Bryce, that today would alter his life, perhaps permanently. Would it be an opportunity to start fresh, or would it only deepen his bitterness and dissatisfaction with life? In any case, the choice was always his, as it always had been. The phone rang around 10 p.m. An unfamiliar number with a Mexican area code appeared on the screen. I took a deep breath before answering. "Hello, Dad." Bryce's voice sounded hoarse, as if he had been shouting or crying for a long time. "Dad, we have a problem." For the last 3 days, I had been in a peculiar state of suspended animation. I had slept fitfully, waking at the slightest sound or phone ring. I had eaten mechanically, tasting nothing. I had spent most of my time in the living room, staring into space and replaying the same thoughts repeatedly. After Bryce's call, I deliberately took my time responding. He informed me about being detained at customs, about the confiscation of money, about the fact that he and Polly were facing severe penalties. His voice trembled as he pleaded for my help, to hire a lawyer, to contact the American consulate, to do anything. I listened to him in silence, only occasionally interjecting with brief questions to keep the conversation going.
"Dad, you don't understand."
"The conditions here are dreadful," he said. "They're holding us in some room at customs, and tomorrow they'll transfer us to a real prison if we don't post bail." "Where did you obtain such a sum, Bryce?" I asked, attempting to sound genuinely surprised. A pause. It was our savings," he replied uncertainly. "We were saving for a house. We wanted to make the down payment after we returned from vacation." Lies. More lies. "And you transported all your savings to Mexico?" "Why?" We wanted to deposit it in an offshore bank. Polly read somewhere that the interest rates were favorable there. I almost smiled as I listened to these pathetic excuses. My son had never been adept at lying convincingly. "And how much did they confiscate?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer from Edward.
38,600 pesos, Bryce exhaled. "Allor money, Dad."
"Everything we've saved over the years." I waited, giving him an opportunity to confess, to tell the truth. But he adhered to his story. "Dad, we need a lawyer," he repeated. "A competent lawyer who understands Mexican law. Otherwise, we could be imprisoned for years." "Lawyers are costly, Bryce," I said with a sigh. "And I don't possess that kind of money."
"You know we live on my pension."
"But your savings." "What savings?" I interrupted him. "All I have is what's in the bank, and that's barely enough to subsist on. You should be aware of that better than anyone." There was a heavy silence on the line. I could almost visualize Bryce attempting to process my answer, realizing I wasn't going to help him. "Dad, please." His voice trembled.
"We reina truly dire situation here. Pali won't stop crying."
We don't know what to do. Contact the consulate, I advised. They're obligated to assist citizens who encounter difficulties abroad. We already tried. They cannot intervene in Mexican justice, only basic consular support, no real assistance. I sighed again, this time demonstratively louder.
Listen, Brice, I'm an old man.
I don't have funds for expensive lawyers. All I can do is contact a couple of acquaintances. Perhaps they'll have some advice, but I can't promise miracles. Anything, Dad. Please. We concluded the conversation on that note. I promised to call back when I learned something, but deliberately left him in suspense. Let him suffer. Let him feel helpless and afraid. That's precisely how I felt when I discovered the empty stash. Now sitting in my chair 3 days after their arrest, I was contemplating the next step. Edward kept me regularly informed of developments. According to him, Bryce and Polly had been transferred from the Customs Detention Center to the Investigation Center in Cancun. They had been charged with currency smuggling and suspicion of money laundering, standard procedure in such cases. Without a lawyer or bail, they could spend anywhere from 2 weeks to a month there before their case was heard in court. The Mexican judicial system is not the swiftest in the world, Edward explained in our last conversation. Besides, Ramon has connections. He can, how should I phrase it? Slightly prolong the process if necessary. How much? I asked. Well, let's just say their vacation will definitely be extended. In any other circumstance, I would be outraged by such corruption. But now, I felt only cold satisfaction. Let them remain there longer. Let them experience the consequences of their actions. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was the number of the transport company where Bryce worked. Hello, I answered, anticipating what was coming.
Good afternoon. This is Frank Parker from Transcontinental Logistics.
I'm attempting to reach Bryce Kirk, but his phone isn't answering. Are you his father? Yes, that's me, I confirmed. Bryce is currently on vacation in Mexico. He should be back in a few days. There was a pause on the other end of the line. You see, Mr. Kirk, the issue is that Bryce's vacation concluded the day before yesterday. He was scheduled to report to work yesterday morning, but he failed to appear and isn't answering his phone. This is entirely uncharacteristic of him. I feigned surprise.
That's peculiar.
I was certain he and his wife had taken 2 weeks off. No, sir. Bryce's request only covers 1 week, from June 15th to June 21st. Yesterday, he was supposed to be on the Kansas City-Des Moines route. I see, I said. There must be some sort of mix-up. I'll try to reach him and tell him to call you. I'd appreciate that. Inform him that if he doesn't make contact by tomorrow morning, we'll have to find a replacement for his routes. We have a strict policy regarding no-shows. After that conversation, I decided to walk to the flower shop where Polly worked. Flower Paradise was only 2 blocks from my house. A small shop with a window display filled with potted plants and bouquets. The bell above the door chimed melodiously as I entered. Behind the counter stood a young woman with short red hair. Not Polly. She smiled warmly.
Good afternoon. How may I assist you?
Hello. I nodded.
I'm looking for Polly Kirk.
Does she work here? The girl's smile became a little strained. Polly was supposed to return to work 2 days ago, but she hasn't shown up.
Are you a relative?
I'm her father-in-law, I replied. That's odd. She didn't mention any change in plans. I can't say.
The Gelstracht.
The owner is very displeased. Polly only took a week's vacation, and now she's not answering her phone. I had to take extra shifts.
That's very strange, it shook my head.
I thought she and my son were still in Mexico. Perhaps their flight was delayed, the girl suggested. Or maybe they decided to extend their stay. Although that's not like Polly. She's always very conscientious. I could barely suppress a smile. Conscientious was not the first word I would use to describe my daughter-in-law. Perhaps, I agreed. If you see her, please tell her to call me. Leaving the store, I felt a peculiar sense of gratification, the initial indications that the plan was succeeding. Bryce and Polly weren't merely in an unpleasant situation. Their lives were beginning to unravel. Their jobs, their reputations, their stability, everything they had so recklessly jeopardized for quick money. That evening, I received another call from Bryce. His voice sounded even more depleted than last time. "Dad, they transferred us to a real prison," he said without preamble.
"It's a dreadful place."
"Polly is in the women's block, and I hardly ever see her. We urgently need a lawyer." "I'm trying to do something, son," I replied, attempting to sound concerned. "But it's not that simple." I called the consulate and spoke to some clerk. He said he could provide a list of lawyers, but they're all very expensive.
"What about your friends?"
"You said you'd call some acquaintances." I did, but no one has any connections in Mexico. One person suggested contacting human rights organizations, but it's a lengthy process. Bryce groaned. "We don't have time for lengthy processes, Dad. The preliminary hearing is in 3 days. Without a lawyer, we're facing actual jail time." "How much do we need for a lawyer?" I asked. "We spoke to a local one. He's asking for a $5,000 advance. He's the only one who speaks English and is willing to take the case immediately." I paused, pretending to consider the situation.
5,000 pesos.
"That's a lot of money, Bryce. All my savings amount to about $3,000.
Can you secure a loan?
His voice sounded desperate.
Pledge the house?
"Anything, Dad."
We're in a desperate predicament.
"A loan at my age?" I smiled bitterly. "Banks don't grant loans to 68-year-old retirees, Bryce."
And the house is the only asset he possesses. Where will he reside if he mortgage it?
"But you must do something." His voice adopted a hysterical tone. "Polly and I are suffering here."
Do you comprehend that?
"Suffering?" I sighed. "And do you comprehend that I'm an old man with limited capabilities? I cannot perform miracles, Bryce. All I can do is gather $3,000 and send it to you. It won't be enough for a lawyer, but at least it will cover some of your daily expenses or bribes for the guards. I don't know."
3,000 pesos.
He sounded disappointed. "That's insufficient, Dad."
It's too little.
"That's all I have," I said firmly. "If you're not content with that, seek other options." After a pause, he yielded. "Okay, send $3,000.
How soon can you do that?
It'll require a couple of days to withdraw the money and arrange the transfer. Provide me with the address to send it to and the recipient's name." He dictated the details of a local lawyer who had agreed to receive the money on his behalf. I wrote down the information, though I had no intention of utilizing it. "Hang in there, son," I said before hanging up. "I'll try to help as much as I can." That night, I slept better than I had in days. Part of me felt guilty for punishing my own son so coldly. But another, larger part of me was certain I was right. He hadn't just stolen my money. He had stolen my trust, my respect, my family bonds, and now he was paying for it. In the morning, I called Edward to obtain the latest news. "The situation is progressing according to plan," he said. "Ramon reports they've been charged with 2 counts, currency smuggling and suspicion of money laundering. The preliminary hearing is scheduled for Monday." What are they facing? Without a good lawyer and with aggravating circumstances, up to 2 years, but most likely it will be a substantial fine, confiscation of money, and deportation. They are American citizens, after all. How soon can they be deported? It's hard to say, Edward pondered. If they pleaded guilty right away, cooperated with the investigation, and had a good lawyer, 10 to 14 days. But in their situation, It could extend for a month, perhaps longer. A month in a Mexican prison. I tried to imagine how Bryce and Polly, spoiled and accustomed to comfort, would perceive this. Frightened, confused, without money or support. "There's something else," Edward continued. "Ramon says, your son has begun to suspect that their detention was not accidental. He asked the guard if anyone in particular was interested in their flight, their luggage." "And what did the guard say?" "Nothing, of course, but the fact that your son is asking such questions." I nodded, although Edward couldn't see it. "So, he's starting to comprehend. Are you prepared for the fact that when they return, the conversation will not be pleasant?" "I'm ready," I replied. "By then, I'll have a special welcome prepared for them." After speaking to Edward, I decided to walk over to Bryce and Polly's house. I wished to confirm that everything was in order with their residence. Perhaps collect the mail that must have accumulated in the box. As I approached their bungalow, I observed an elderly woman knocking on the door. She appeared annoyed. "Good afternoon," I called out to her.
"Are you looking for Bryce and Polly?"
The woman turned around. "Who are you?" "Eugene Kirk, Bryce's father," I introduced myself. "Oh." Her face softened slightly.
"Mrs. Henderson, the landlord."
"Your son and his wife owe me this month's rent. It's already the 5th, and there's no money. They're not answering their phones, and no one's home." "They're on vacation," I explained. "In Mexico. They were supposed to be back a few days ago, but apparently, they've been delayed." "Whether they're delayed or not, the rent must be paid on time," Mrs. Henderson grumbled discontentedly. "The contract clearly states that if the rent is more than 5 days late, I have the right to terminate the agreement." "I'm sure it's some kind of misunderstanding," I tried to reassure her. "As soon as they return, they'll pay immediately." "If they return before the 10th, she snapped. "Otherwise, I'll have to find new tenants." The landlord and I stood in front of the house where my son and his wife lived. Their small world was beginning to fracture piece by piece. His job was in jeopardy, and now their home was too. All because of one impulsive decision, one act of betrayal. There were several bills and notices in the mailbox, including a reminder about an overdue credit card payment. I took the mail with me, another fragment of the puzzle that was coalescing to form a complete picture of their financial situation. That evening, I called Transcontinental Logistics and inquired about Bryce's whereabouts. I was informed that he had been temporarily suspended for failing to report to work, and if he didn't show up within 2 days, he would be terminated according to company policy. "Perhaps something happened to him," I said. "Maybe we should wait." "I'm sorry, Mr. Kirk, but the rules are the same for everyone," replied the personnel manager. "We have a tight schedule and routes that cannot be left without drivers. We have already hired a temporary replacement for Bryce." So, the wheel continued to turn. Things were worsening for Bryce and Polly daily, and that was merely the inception. I still retained a few strategic moves that would ultimately teach them a lesson about how betrayal always carries a cost. I felt no joy about what was occurring, more like a grim satisfaction. It was akin to performing a difficult but essential task. Justice must prevail, even if one has to administer it oneself. Time stretched out like an old elastic band. 2 weeks of waiting transformed into an eternity filled with phone calls, anxiety, and a strange, almost painful satisfaction. During that period, Bryce called me 4 times, each conversation shorter than the last, his voice progressively more desperate. I continued to play the role of a helpless old man who sincerely wished to assist but could do nothing. "Dad, the judge has rendered his decision," Bryce informed me in our last conversation 3 days ago. "We're being deported. Thank goodness we avoided jail time." "That's good news, son," I replied with feigned relief. "Good." His voice sounded bitter. "All our money was confiscated. They compelled us to pay a massive fine. We had to sign a multitude of papers and surrender everything we possessed. Even Polly's wedding ring contributed to the payment.
And you know what's peculiar?
The customs officer who questioned us mentioned he received a tip. Someone specifically reported us. A tip. I tried to sound surprised. From where? He didn't say, but I'm certain it wasn't a coincidence. Someone knew we were carrying money. I remained silent, not wishing to delve into the subject. When are you returning? I asked instead.
The day after tomorrow.
The flight departs at 4:45 p.m. We'll arrive in Kansas City around 11 p.m. I'll meet you at the airport, I offered. No need, Dad, Bryce replied quickly. We'll take a taxi.
With what money?
You said they confiscated everything. A pause. I could almost see Bryce mentally reviewing the options. Polly has a spare credit card. The limit is low, but it'll suffice for a taxi. Lies. More lies. I knew from the overdue bills I found in their mailbox that all of Polly's credit cards had been blocked for non-payment. As you say, I agreed. Come directly to my place. You don't have the keys to your house, do you? We have the keys, Bryce replied. But yes, we'll stop by your place first. We need to talk. Talk was a new word in our vocabulary. All these years, Bryce and I had never truly conversed. We exchanged information, argued, accused each other. Yes, but we didn't talk. Now, sitting at the airport awaiting their arrival, I contemplated the impending conversation. What would it be like? Would Bryce confess to the theft or continue to deny it? What would Polly say? That manipulative woman who I was certain had suggested stealing my money. The display board showed that their flight had landed with a slight delay at 11:15 p.m. I deliberately did not proceed to the arrival's exit, but remained in the waiting area. I wished to grant them the opportunity to decide for themselves whether they would genuinely come to me or attempt to avoid the meeting. After approximately 40 minutes, I spotted them, tired, haggard, with worn bags instead of the suitcases they had flown in with. Bryce appeared to have aged 10 years. His cheeks were hollow, dark circles beneath his eyes, and his hair seemed to have grayed further. Polly, usually so meticulously groomed, now resembled a faded shadow of her former self. No makeup, dull hair pulled back into a messy ponytail. They walked slowly across the hall, not noticing me. I observed them until they approached the exit. Only then did I rise and follow them. Bryce, Polly, I called out to them at the door. They turned around in unison. Their faces reflected a whole spectrum of emotions: surprise, fear, relief, and something else I couldn't quite pinpoint. Shame, perhaps. Dad. Bryce blinked as if he couldn't believe his eyes.
You came after all.
Of course I did, I said, moving closer. I couldn't leave you without transportation after everything you've endured. Polly looked at me wearily, as if expecting a trick. Her eyes, usually bright and expressive, now seemed dull. Hello, Eugene, she said quietly.
Pali y Nadith.
You look exhausted. I am, she said hoarsely. It's been a difficult 2 weeks. I can imagine, I said, trying to keep the sarcasm out of my voice. The car's in the parking lot. Let's go.
We talk at home.
The drive to Overland Park was silent.
Bryce sat in the front seat beside me, staring out the window at the nighttime scenery rushing past.
Polly settled in the back, and occasionally I caught her gaze in the rearview mirror, alert, assessing. You must be hungry, I asked, breaking the silence when we were halfway there. Not really, Bryce replied. They fed us before the flight. A lousy sandwich, but still food. I have soup and meatloaf at home, I offered. I can heat it up when we arrive. Thanks, Dad, he said, his voice sounding genuinely grateful. I felt a twinge of guilt. Despite everything that had transpired, despite his betrayal, Bryce was still my son, my only child. Could I despise him and still cherish him simultaneously? This dilemma had tormented me for the past few days. When we reached my house, it was already past midnight. I let them in and switched on the lights in the living room. Everything looked precisely the same as it had 2 weeks ago when they departed, full of hopes and plans for their Mexican adventure. But they themselves had changed, as if something within them had broken, some spring that had previously kept them taut. "Make yourselves comfortable," I said, indicating the sofa. "I'll go heat up the food." I busied myself in the kitchen longer than necessary, affording them time to collect their thoughts. Through the open door, I could hear their muffled voices. They were disputing something.
Pali sounded insistent. Brise indecisive.
Finally, when I returned with a tray of soup and meatloaf, they both fell silent. "Here, eat up," I said, placing the tray on the coffee table. "We'll talk later." They attacked the food with unexpected voracity. Apparently, the airplane sandwich hadn't satisfied their hunger. I sat in my chair opposite them, observing them and contemplating the upcoming conversation. What would I say? What would they say? Would they admit to the theft? "Thanks, Dad," Bryce said, pushing his empty plate away. "This is exactly what we needed." Polly nodded in agreement, but her gaze remained guarded. She had always been more astute than Bryce, more perceptive. Perhaps she already suspected my role in their Mexican misfortunes. So, I folded my arms across my chest.
"Tell me what happened. All the specifics."
Bryce took a deep breath and commenced his narrative about how they were stopped at customs at Cancun airport. How the money was discovered in a hidden compartment in their suitcase. How they were interrogated for hours without an interpreter, without the possibility of contacting a lawyer. How they were held in a detention cell for 2 weeks before the decision to deport them was made. "It was hell, Dad." His voice trembled. Real hell. Polly was kept separately in the women's block. I only saw her at the hearings. She lost 8 kilos in those 2 weeks. Polly sat with her eyes downcast and said nothing. Her hands, usually well manicured, now looked rough with broken nails. "And all because of money," Bryce continued. "That damned money we saved for the down payment on the house. We were supposed to declare it, but we didn't know we had to complete any forms if we were carrying more than $10,000. I listened carefully to this falsehood without interrupting. Let him speak. Let him entangle himself further in his story.
"What about your hopes?"
I asked when he finished. "Have you contacted your employers?" Bryce and Polly exchanged glances. "Not yet," Bryce replied. "We haven't been able to call anyone from Mexico except you. But I'm sure Transcontinental will understand the situation. I'll just explain to them that there was a misunderstanding and I couldn't make contact."
"What about you, Pali?"
I turned to my daughter-in-law. "Will the flower shop understand too?" She pursed her lips. "I don't know. Lorraine isn't very accommodating. But I'll try to explain." I decided not to inform them that I already knew about the loss of their jobs. Let them confront that reality themselves.
"What about your house?"
I continued my questioning.
"Have you paid rent?" Another exchange of glances.
"No," Bryce admitted. We haven't been able to, but I'm sure Mrs. Henderson will understand if we explain the situation."
I shook my head. "She came here looking for you."
She was very displeased about the late payment. She mentioned terminating the contract if you didn't pay by the 10th. The 10th. Bryce turned pale. But today is already the 15th. "Precisely," I nodded. "I'm afraid you may have a housing problem." Polly suddenly began to cry quietly, without hysterics, just tears streaming down her cheeks. She didn't attempt to wipe them away, as if she didn't notice. "What are we going to do now?" Bryce asked. His voice sounded confused, like someone who had suddenly lost all sense of direction. I paused before answering. I pretended to think, even though I had already made up my mind. "You can stay with me until you find employment and a place to live," I finally offered. "Bryce's room is still here, even though it's been converted into a storage area. I can clear it out in a couple of days. Really?
Hope flashed in Brice's eyes. You don't mind.
You're my family, I said simply.
No matter what.
The phrase hung in the air, laden with double meaning. Even though you stole my money, was what I implied. But did I utter that aloud? No, not yet. Thanks, Dad. Bryce looked genuinely grateful. We won't impose for long, just until we get back on our feet. Yes, thank you, Eugene, Polly echoed, wiping away her tears. We truly appreciate your assistance. I nodded, accepting their gratitude, but internally I felt a growing irritation. They continued to deceive me. They continued to portray themselves as innocent victims of circumstance rather than the thieves they truly were. You'll sleep in the living room tonight, I said, standing up.
The sofa folds out.
Bedding is in the closet in the hallway. Tomorrow, I'll begin clearing out the room. We can help with the clearing out, Bryce offered. No, I cut him off. Those are my personal belongings.
I handle it myself.
As I walked away, I took one last look at them. Two lost individuals in unfamiliar territory. My territory, my rules, and my revenge, which was just beginning. The next morning, I awoke early as usual. I quietly passed the living room where Bryce and Polly were still asleep, and went to the kitchen to prepare breakfast. The clatter of dishes roused them. First, Bryce appeared, disheveled, his face puffy from sleep. Then, Polly, wrapped in an old bathrobe she had discovered in the bathroom. Good morning, I greeted them. Coffee? Yes, please, they replied in unison, sitting down at the kitchen table. I poured them coffee and placed plates of omelette on the table. We ate breakfast in silence, broken only by the clinking of forks against plates. It was strange to see them here in my house, at my table, after everything that had transpired. I'm going to drive over to our house today, Bryce said, finishing his coffee. I'll speak to Mrs. Henderson and explain the situation. Perhaps she hasn't found new tenants yet. You can take my car, I offered, and then stop by Transcontinental and speak to your boss. Thanks, Dad. I will. Polly was silent, lost in her thoughts. She looked bewildered, as if everything that was happening was too complex for her.
What about you, Polly?
What are your plans? I asked. She looked up at me with tired eyes. I'll call the store and try to explain. Then maybe I'll look for other florist jobs online. You can use my computer, I nodded. It's in the study. After breakfast, Bryce left in my car, and Polly settled down at the computer in the study. I began to sort through Bryce's room, which had transformed into a storage area for unnecessary items over the past few years. The work was monotonous, but it provided me with time to think. Observing Bryce and Polly, their confusion and despair, I experienced mixed emotions. On the one hand, I felt pity for them. They had lost everything, money, jobs, and soon they would be homeless. On the other hand, they deserved it for their betrayal, to steal from their own father, a man who had always assisted them whenever he could. That was unforgivable. Bryce returned 3 hours later, looking empty and defeated. Mrs. Henderson has already signed a contract with new tenants, he said as he entered the house. They're moving in 2 days. We need to retrieve our belongings before then.
What about your job?
I asked, even though I already knew the answer. Fired for absenteeism, his voice sounded lifeless. Company policy doesn't permit exceptions, even in such force majeure circumstances. Polly looked out of her office.
Same story for me.
Lorraine said she already hired a new florist, and I shouldn't come in. I feigned sympathy. I'm sorry, guys, but you're young. You'll find new jobs. With a history like this? Bryce smiled bitterly. Fired for absenteeism. Deported from Mexico for currency smuggling. Who will hire me? Just don't mention it on your resume. I shrugged. As if it were that simple, he grumbled. In the evening after dinner, as we sat in the living room watching TV, Bryce suddenly raised the subject of money. Dad, we need to get back on our feet somehow. Maybe you could, lend us a little, just a small amount, just to get us through the first few months. I slowly turned to him. After I have already provided you with a roof over your heads, after I feed you, you're still asking for money? I know it's a lot, he lowered his eyes, but we truly have nothing to pay for food, gas, or anything else we need. I felt anger boiling up inside me. They stole $40,000 from me, and now they were asking for more. What happened to your savings? I asked, refraining from making a direct accusation. The ones that were confiscated in Mexico? Bryce and Polly exchanged quick glances. I told you, Bryce began. We were saving for a down payment on a house. And you decided to take all your savings with you to Mexico? I raised my eyebrows.
Extraña decisión, don't you think?
Polly suddenly rose from her seat. I need to lie down.
My head hurts.
She quickly left the room, leaving Bryce alone with me. You're not telling me everything, son, I said, looking him straight in the eye. And I'm beginning to think I know what it is. A week had passed since Bryce and Polly's return. A week of strange coexistence under one roof. They attempting to piece together their broken lives, and I observing their torment with grim satisfaction. During that time, they had moved their belongings out of their former home, filling my garage and half of my basement. Polly secured a temporary position as a cashier at a supermarket, while Bryce continued to submit resumes without success. Every evening at dinner, the three of us sat at the table, maintaining the semblance of a normal family life. The conversations were superficial and tense. Bryce and Polly tried not to bring up the subject of money or Mexico. I also avoided the topic, awaiting the opportune moment. It had to arrive. I was certain of it. That morning, I awoke earlier than usual to the sound of footsteps in the hallway. I checked the clock. It was 5. Too early for Bryce and Polly, who had been sleeping until 9 lately with no particular reason to rise early. I listened. The footsteps were cautious, stealthy. Someone clearly wished not to be heard. I quietly got out of bed, put on my robe, and left the bedroom. The hallway was empty, but there was a faint rustling sound emanating from the study. I crept up to the door and peered inside cautiously. Bryce was standing at my desk, rummaging through the papers in the top drawer. In the dim morning light, his silhouette was blurred, but I could clearly discern his concentrated face and the tense posture of someone engaged in something prohibited. What was he seeking? Money, documents, or perhaps he had finally begun to suspect my role in his Mexican misfortunes and was seeking confirmation. I decided not to reveal my presence. I stepped away from the door and returned to the bedroom. But instead of lying down, I sat in a chair by the window from where I could hear what was happening in the house. 20 minutes later, there was the muffled sound of a drawer closing, followed by cautious footsteps in the hallway. The door to Bryce and Polly's room creaked softly and closed. At breakfast, Bryce looked tense and avoided my gaze. Something had shifted in his behavior. He seemed wary, as if he were anticipating a blow. Polly, as usual, was lost in her thoughts, mechanically chewing her toast and washing it down with coffee. Any plans for today? I asked casually. A job interview at a transportation company at 10, Bryce replied, still not looking at me. I hope it goes well, I nodded. Unlikely, he shrugged. But it's worth a try. After breakfast, Bryce left for his interview. Polly went to her shift at the supermarket, and I was left alone in the house. The first thing I did was go to the study to check what exactly Bryce was interested in among my papers. The top drawer of the desk was neatly closed, but when I opened it, I immediately noticed that the documents were not where I had left them. I had always been meticulous about these matters. Years of working as an insurance appraiser had taught me to be organized. The papers were slightly out of place, and some of the folders had been turned upside down. But what exactly was he looking for? And then I noticed the phone bill was on top, even though I clearly remembered putting it under other papers. The bill detailed all calls for the last month, including international ones, including my conversations with Edward Null on the day Bryce and Polly flew to Mexico. Bryce could see that I had called customs immediately after their departure. He could then look up the number on the internet and find out who it belonged to. The evidence was circumstantial, but sufficient to arouse suspicion. I sighed. The moment of truth was approaching faster than I had planned. Well, I was ready for confrontation. The day passed with the usual chores. I went to the store, prepared dinner, even did some weeding in the garden, a small plot of land behind the house that in recent years had become more overgrown with weeds than a well-tended garden. By evening, Polly returned, silent and tired after her shift. Bryce showed up around 7, his face betraying neither disappointment nor joy. Apparently, the interview had gone neutrally. We ate dinner in tense silence. Bryce still avoided my gaze, and Polly was lost in her thoughts. After dinner, I offered coffee. They agreed, and we moved to the living room, me in my chair, them on the sofa. I sensed that Bryce was about to say something. He sat on the edge of the sofa, clutching his cup so tightly that his knuckles whitened. Polly seemed to notice his tension, too. She placed her hand on his knee, either to support him or to restrain him. "Dad," Bryce finally began, his voice. "I need to ask you something." I took a sip of coffee before answering. "Ask away." "You turned us in, didn't you?" He looked up at me, his eyes full of pain and anger. "You told customs about the money." Here it was, the moment of truth. I could have lied, could have pretended to be surprised, offended by such an assumption. But why? Wasn't this the moment I had been working toward? So they would know that betrayal had a price. "Yes," I replied calmly. "It was me." Polly gasped. Bryce froze as if he couldn't believe his ears, even though this was the answer he had expected. "But why?" He exhaled. "Why?" I slowly placed the cup on the table.
Are you truly asking me why, Bryce?
After stealing $40,000 from my hidden stash. Now it was his turn to be silent. Polly turned so pale that the freckles on her face looked like splashes of dirt on a white sheet. You knew."
Bryce mattered.
"Of course I knew," I replied. "I discovered the theft the day after your visit, and I knew immediately who had done it." "Then why didn't you contact the police?" Polly finally found the strength to speak. I looked at her with an icy smile. "What evidence did I possess? Your fingerprints on a safe that doesn't officially exist? My money that I kept at home without paying taxes on it? No. The police would have been useless. I decided to take matters into my own hands. So, it was all planned." Bryce looked at me with growing realization. "The meeting at the airport. Your surprise when we informed you about the arrest. Every little detail," I confirmed. "My old friend Edward Null worked for customs. He has connections in Mexico. One phone call was enough to arrange a warm welcome for you."
Polly suddenly burst into tears.
Not quiet tears like before, but loud, convulsive sobs. Bryce sat motionless, his face frozen in an expression of shock and betrayal. "You let us suffer in a Mexican prison for 2 weeks, he finally said.
"You're un son, your family."
Family. I felt the long-suppressed anger rising within me. "You call that family, Bryce? Stealing from your own father as family? Lying to my face as family? We were desperate." He began to justify himself. "We had debts. Creditors were pressuring us. And the solution was to steal from me?"
He leaned forward.
"The man who always helped you when you asked, who raised you alone after your mother died?" "We were going to repay it," Polly interjected, wiping away her tears. "Honestly, Eugene, we only wanted to take some of it, But then you saw how much there was and decided to take it all, I finished for her, and you weren't going to repay it. Your tickets were one way, I checked. That was a falsehood. I hadn't checked their tickets, but judging by the way they looked at each other, I was perfectly correct. You planned to start a new life in Mexico with my money, to forget about me, leaving me with no means of support in my old age. Is that what family does, Bryce?
Silence.
Heavy, oppressive silence filled with unspoken guilt and anger. What are you going to do to us? Bryce finally asked. His voice sounded lifeless, as if he already knew the answer and had resigned himself to it.
Do.
I raised my eyebrows. I already have. Your money has been confiscated. You've lost your jobs and your home, too. You've returned to Overland Park empty-handed and with your lives in ruins. The lesson that betrayal has its price has been taught. And now you're going to expel us, he said. It wasn't a question, but a statement. Not today, I replied, surprising even myself. You have 3 days to find new housing. On the 4th day, I'll change the locks. Bryce looked stunned. 3 days. Where will we go? We don't have money for rent. That's not my concern anymore. I cut him off. You're adults.
You made your own choices. Now life with the consequences.
You're a cruel man, Polly said quietly, looking at me with a mixture of fear and disgust.
No, I shook my head. Your betrayal made me a cruel man.
I merely responded in kind. I rose from my chair, signaling that the conversation was over.
Now, excuse me.
I'm tired. Tomorrow will be a difficult day for all of us. The next morning, I awoke late, still feeling the emotional strain of yesterday's confrontation. As soon as I left the bedroom, I sensed that something had changed in the house. It was too quiet, too empty. I looked into Bryce and Polly's room. The bed was made, but their belongings were gone. The bathroom was empty, too. Their toothbrushes, shampoo, all their personal items were gone. There was a note on the kitchen table, written in Bryce's handwriting. We decided not to wait 3 days. Thanks for the shelter, but staying in this house is unbearable after yesterday. The keys are on the nightstand in the hall. Don't look for us, Bryce and Polly. I crumpled up the note and threw it in the trash can. A strange feeling of emptiness and relief filled me simultaneously. It's over. Revenge had been served. Justice had been restored. But then, why did my heart feel so bitter? I made coffee, toasted some bread, and sat down at the table. The silence in the house, usually so comforting, now seemed deafening. I caught myself listening for footsteps that would never return, for voices that would never be heard. Bryce and Polly were gone from my life, perhaps forever. My own son, my only family. But they made that choice themselves, I reminded myself. They betrayed me first. After breakfast, I went around the house, checking to see if they had left anything behind. In the dresser in their room, I found Bryce's forgotten t-shirt, the one I gave him for his 35th birthday. In the bathroom, on the shelf, was a bottle of Polly's perfume. Small things, insignificant things, but they spoke of the haste with which they had departed the house. In the garage, I discovered that they had taken most of their belongings, but left a few boxes of old books, Bryce's childhood toys, and some souvenirs. Things that had no practical value but held memories. By noon, I realized I couldn't remain in this house any longer.
Too many ghosts of the past, too many unspoken words, too much pain.
I decided to take a walk, aimlessly, just to clear my head. Overland Park greeted me with a sunny summer day. People hurried about their business, paying no attention to the elderly man wandering the streets without any particular direction. I walked to the park, sat down on a bench by the pond, and watched the ducks swimming on the water for a long time. What did I feel?
Satisfaction from my revenge?
Yes, in part. Bryce and Polly received what they deserved for their betrayal. But there was also bitterness. The bitterness of realizing that I had lost my son. Not today.
No.
Perhaps I lost him long ago when he decided he could steal from his own father, or even earlier when he stopped sharing his problems and dreams with me. When a wall of unspoken words and grievances grew between us. When I got home in the evening, I retrieved an old photo album from the closet. I leafed through the pages, looking at photos of young Bryce, teenage Bryce, Bryce with Elaine, family photos from a time when we were still a real family. What went wrong? Where did I make a mistake in raising him? Or is it not about me? Perhaps he's just that kind of person, weak, envious, willing to betray for quick money. I don't know. We'll never know the truth. The next day, I started planning my new life. A life without Bryce, without constant requests for financial assistance, without manipulation and lies. I still possessed savings. Not the ones Bryce and Polly stole, but the ones I kept in the bank. Not much, but enough to fulfill a long-held dream, a trip to Europe. Elaine and I had always wished to visit Italy, France, Spain, to see the Colosseum, the Eiffel Tower, the Sagrada Familia. But first, we had to raise Bryce. Then financial difficulties arose. Then Elaine's illness. The trip remained a dream. Now that I was free of all obligations, nothing stood in the way of making it happen. I opened my laptop and began researching travel routes, ticket prices, and hotels. Immersed in planning, I forgot about the bitterness of the last few days for a while. A new chapter in my life lay ahead, without toxic relationships, without betrayal, without pain. In the evening, Edward called. I hadn't spoken to him since Bryce and Polly returned from Mexico. "How are you, Eugene?" he asked after exchanging greetings.
Everything all right.
More or less, I replied. Bryce and Polly are gone for good, it seems. Did they discover your role in their arrest?
Yes, there was a confrontation, not a pleasant one.
Edward paused, then asked, "Do you regret what you did?" I thought about it. Do I regret that I punished the transgressors? That I made them feel the consequences of their actions? That I may have lost my son forever? No, I finally replied. I don't regret it. They received what they deserved. Justice prevailed. Well, if that's how you feel, Edward's voice sounded not too convinced. Just know that I'm here if you need me. Thank you, my friend, I said sincerely. I appreciate your support. After our conversation, I went out to the back porch and sat in an old chair, watching the sunset. The sky was ablaze with orange and pink hues, gradually yielding to twilight. Elaine loved sunsets. Every sunset is a promise of a new dawn, she used to say. I thought about tomorrow, about the new opportunities it would bring, about a life without the shadow of betrayal hanging over every day, of the freedom to be myself without looking back at other people's expectations and demands. Bryce and Polly left, taking with them the bitterness of resentment and the awareness of their defeat. I stayed behind with a sense of restored justice and plans for a future of which they would no longer be a part. Perhaps someday, many years from now, we will meet again. Perhaps they will learn from what happened, change, become better people. Or maybe not. In any case, it's no longer my concern. Tomorrow, I will book tickets to Rome, the first stop on my European journey. I will walk through ancient streets, admire fountains and cathedrals, drink real Italian coffee in small cafes. Then I'll go to Venice, Florence,